Hello.
Hey, David. How's it going?
Oh, pretty good.
Thanks for being here, first of all.
Thank you.
And thanks
for
for bringing all this. This is pretty stoked about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be a good
I'm
time.
excited.
This is gonna be a real good one.
I hope so.
Let's just start it off with what you got here. Show us a bit of this. If these guys will quit fighting.
Yeah, it's like at home.
Yeah.
I'm a custom knife maker here in Arkansas. Got into it around 2011 before the craze really kind of kicked off. Taken a few classes from a few individuals and kind of just taking it from there. Started off the first few years doing it, kind of learning trial and error, failing a lot, watching a lot of YouTube videos from some guys in other countries whose language I don't speak.
That's exactly how you start a good hobby.
Yeah, I feel like. Yeah, I mean, if you can find it on YouTube and you don't know what they're saying, it's probably a good one.
They're probably good at it, yeah.
You know, and I kind of started using recycled steel, like old industrial saw blades, stuff like that, because the company I work for, I could buy them there. And then when that slowed down and closed down, I really got in the knife stuff pretty hot and heavy. I went back to college and did this pretty well to make a living for a while, and really enjoyed it more as a hobby and wanted to kind of drop it back to that. Went back to work full-time somewhere else and took it back to a hobby level, really enjoyed it. It kind of let me perfect some things that I really wanted to work on, take a little more time building. Wasn't pushing myself for sales as much as I was quality. And, over the last few years, it's come together nicely. And I've had pretty good luck selling a lot of what I build. I sell more of the smaller knives. I think most knife makers do at my level.
I feel like that's
hobby status.
Yeah, I feel like that's a lot easier to move just because.
Yeah.
I know me. I prefer a small knife because that's what I'm carrying.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I don't have a lot of the small stuff. Is because it's usually before I even have one finished. I either have an order for a similar one or I have that one sold before it's even got handles on it.
Right.
When I first started building, I didn't draw anything. Everything I did was, from my head, which was fine in the beginning. And then after learning from a few guys that are really well respected and great knife makers, that drawing made a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I think once I started drawing my stuff, so I had an idea of something I had to stick to a game plan, it made it where I threw a lot more stuff away. But at the same time, it made it where what I was building came out to be the drawing. And it pushed me to meet that standard. Now, my Damascus that I do make, I don't normally draw the pattern. I kind of have an idea of what it should look like. But just my carbon steel, I'll even draw in the Hamon line design that I want in the blade when I heat treat.
You can wow, I didn't realize that. So you can actually make the pattern you want with Damascus and with the heat treat?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, when I do the heat treat on this one, this particular knife is 1075, and it's a forged blade. I forged in my shop at home. I did this one all by hand, no power hammer or anything.
Damn.
And this knife, I laid my clay along the spine in a real thin manner and washed the whole blade in a real light coat of this. It's refractory cement. And then I came back and had the idea of the broken line like it is. And I kind of went in and just lightly drew some of the clay off where I wanted it to match the drawing that I had done of this knife. And then I went back and made a thicker line, and then you can see where I came in and kind of lightened it up to give it the little window look.
Wow.
And then coated the spine enough to where this back edge is hard as the cutting edge, but this center of the blade is softer so that if you chop with it, it doesn't ring in your hands. It doesn't vibrate. It makes the blade more flexible where if you were to chop and bind it up, you're not as likely to break it. And it looks really cool if you take the time to hand sand, acid dip, hand sand. it's kind of a labor of love when you do one with this kind of finish, because you end up going over it more times than you can count. I spent more time doing the hand finish than I did probably anything else on the knife. But it's one of my personal knives. I would sell it, but it's one of those that it would have to be for the right amount, because every piece of this knife I made by hand.
It does look fantastic.
Man.
The end of the handle and the guard itself, which is tarnished a little bit, is actually $9.50 in quarters that I stacked together and welded in my forge with light pressure. And then you stack them and weld them. I stacked it in 3 stacks. And then once they're stuck together, I come back and grind the edges of the quarter off so that way it doesn't hold any contaminants. And then I go back and start forging them out into a bar and then fold it and kind of get my pattern that I want, just like you do Damascus, in a non-ferrous metal. And then it ends up taking some acid and washing over it, a ferrochloride acid, and you get the pattern to stand out.
Wow.
I'm still shocked that, like,
I didn't even realize that. Wow,
Yeah.
that's some tiny detail too. I wouldn't have ever really paid that much attention to it had you not brought that up.
The end cap and the guard started from the same piece of metal. I forged it. It almost looked like an exclamation point. And then hot cut it, separated it. Wow. Finished forging out the guard, and the bottom is actually, the way this knife's constructed is it's an inset tang. It runs through, and then there's a bolt that's actually slid over and pinned on, and the end of the bolt comes out here. And this is a ball that I turned on my lathe, and then screwed on and secured. And there's 2 very small copper pins that kind of hide into the copper and nickel silver.
They do, yeah. You can't even tell they're there.
And once that's secured down and everything dries, it's as sturdy as it can get. But it gives you a spot where you have a little bit of give, so you can hinge. That way your tang can run relatively straight and then follow out to the shape you need to get a nice fitment. That's one of my favorite that I've built in the past couple years. As far as, took a while, probably have 45 hours in that knife.
Jeez,
that thing is beautiful.
It is a really nice knife, though.
I've started the blade and then set it to the side for about a month, and really had to figure out what I wanted to do. I picked up this piece of stag at a Arkansas knife show here, from a guy out of Little Rock, that sells knife making equipment. He had a few pieces there, and this one just fit my hand, and I thought, well, I've got this blade sitting there at the house, and I wanted to use stag on it, so it came together pretty well.
So a knife like that, besides it's just a gorgeous knife, but like that size, that shape, what do you generally use something like that for?
I've got guys that'll buy something like this and actually hog hunt with it, which is really a lot of fun for me as a maker, because it really puts a knife to a test. I mean,
oh man, I can only imagine.
You know, they bail them up with a dog and stick them and go that route, and it's not something I'm ever wanting to do.
You don't want to be on the wrong end of that.
No, I'm not one for getting gored. But the guys that do it, you know, this style of knife, some of them enjoy it because it's the classical Western kind of thinking of an old school knife. I have another knife here that was actually taken to I think Oklahoma and used on a hog hunt. That I built. This is my personal knife. I built it 5 or 6 years ago. A friend of mine needed a knife to take on a hog hunt. He took that one. He killed 2 hogs with it, brought it back. I cleaned it up a little bit. You know, this size blade works really well for something like that. They work great for camping. They're fast. They're light.
This is very light for that giant size blade.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep. I do
that thing is gnarly.
I do a full flat grind on most of my knives. Pretty well everything I have here is a full flat grind. I do it because it's light. You can get a very strong edge because there's no area behind it that's not built up.
What's a full flat grind?
Like on this knife here, everything comes back from pretty well the back of the spine forward. It's not, a lot of guys hollow grind, which is a convex grind or a concave grind. And then some guys convex grind, this is more of a convex than most that I do, the chopping knife here. But a flat will give it to where it's just a nice, steady, flat taper all the way from the back of the spine to your cutting edge.
Gotcha.
And then at the cutting edge, I convex the edge. I roll it just a little bit so it gives it a little bit more strength behind it. It makes it a little harder to sharpen than with your factory bought knives, your Kershaw, ZT, Benchmade, any of that, because they're a 15-degree bevel, 20-degree bevel, something like that. These have a little bit, they're in that same bevel range, but when I sharpen them, I do it on a belt or on a piece of leather with the sharpening equipment. I use a lot of sandpaper once I get my edge set to actually dress an edge, and it lets that roll just enough that it builds kind of like a peak behind it, and that way when you are cutting or doing anything, you're not going to deflect that edge or chip it or warp it, because if you look down the edge of these, you can actually see, especially on this bigger, thicker edge knife, you can see that roll down the spine or down the cutting edge. It has just a little bit of roll right there. This one has a lot because it is a large,
so
heavy
thick
chopping knife.
Yeah.
That one, I don't use a lot of recycled steel anymore, but that one is. It was a Caterpillar dozer bearing race that a friend of mine had in the shop, and told him what I was wanting to do, and I was wanting to build a big knife, and we took that out on a 88-pound power hammer and went to work on it, and it took a while. That steel doesn't like to move,
Yeah.
even under that heavy of pressure.
I think that's why I would imagine they use that.
And it ended up being a really comfortable big knife. It's a lot of weight.
It is heavy, but that's what you need when you're chopping.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to check it out?
For cutting 2x4s and things like that, it has enough weight behind it that it'll do the work without wearing you out trying to force its way through something. The weight does help.
Yeah, most definitely.
It makes the backswing a little tougher, but once you're used to it, it's not so bad.
What do you think you got in that time-wise?
That one I actually built relatively quickly because I did use the power hammer for the initial draw out and the rough shaping, and then I took it to I've got an old 1880s Peter Wright anvil that I took it to, and a small forging hammer that I really like, a 2.5 pound blacksmith's hammer, and put the bevels in, cleaned up the ricasso area, where it drops in, and then reshaped the tang to a nice curvature so that way it would fit in this framed handle that I built. Forging time, I probably have 4 or 5 hours in the forging the blade and the bevels, and then because the hammer makes such a big difference, and then the handle itself, I probably have between it and fitting the guard and milling it and everything, probably 6 or 7 hours. So really, I mean, this was a knife that, not including heat treat time, I could have done 2 days. I think I spent 3 days on this one. Just kind of took my time a little bit. This is the first larger knife that I built after I had to have surgery on my arm, and so it really was challenging. This first knife I built left-handed, basically, and I
couldn't tell, man. For real,
It
That's
took
great.
a while.
So, is that like generally how long it takes usually to make a knife like that size, or?
If I'm dedicating my time to one particular knife, I can do it relatively quickly. Being 9 years of time learning what not to do,
Right.
and I have a few pieces of equipment in the shop that make a big difference. I bought a small milling machine, so I can actually cut my groove to set my guards in, and then instead of drilling it out and having to do it all by hand with a file, makes a big difference on time wise. And then the more I forge, the better I get at it. I still learn a lot. I take a lot of time when I'm forging, trying to lay out everything and make sure I have enough material. I've got several blades sitting there in a 5-gallon bucket of scrap that just something I didn't like that got tossed to the side, and luckily on this one I didn't end up having to do that. And a few of these others I've made them work.
What would you generally find that you didn't like? I mean, obviously, if there's a crack in it.
Yeah, if there's a crack, if there's this knife, I wanted to leave some of the forging marks, same as on this one. Some of these, like this, I didn't want anything forged to show any of the forge scale, so I made sure when I forged it, I left enough material that I could come in and take that back off on my sander and by hand to hide a lot of that, because I wanted it to have a real refined looking detail to it. Anytime I do Damascus, I have to leave enough material to take off. That way you get the full finish. And the detail of the Damascus all the way around the spine, even into this is called the ricasso, the area that right before it meets the handle where it steps down before it steps into the guard, into that area. And then you want that detail to show on the spine of a real Damascus knife. I don't do as much Damascus right now. Cost is a lot of it. It takes a lot of time to I'll have more time in making the piece of Damascus than I will finishing the knife.
What is that process?
I use all high carbon steel. This knife here, that actually belongs to Randy, I took 1075 15N20, which is a high nickel. It's the shinier steel, and 1084, and stacked it. I think with this one I started with 8 or 9. I think it was 9 layers of steel, each alternating, of the 3 types of steel, and then heated up to critical temperature, which will be, or close to critical, which is your forge welding temperature. It almost looks, the steel goes from being hot to what you would consider normally hot, like a red hot, to a yellow, and then almost a white, and the top of the steel will kind of, I put a flux on there that helps keep any impurities from forming the scale, which will prevent it from bonding together when you go to forge it, to weld it. And when that starts to bubble and it almost looks like melted butter across the top of the metal, then I know it's time to take it and gently set the weld, which I'll usually do on a hammer and anvil, to get the initial weld set. And then once I check it and make sure it's not pulled apart or bowed anywhere, then I'll take it to my power hammer or my press and really start drawing it out. And then I'll cut it in sections, restack it, do the same process over. And I'll do that several times. This is a lower layer count. I think this one, I only stacked it 3 times. So it's relatively low. But I'll do it up to 10, 15 times, stacking it, and get up, 3, 4, 500 layers, of individual layers of steel, and then forge out the shape of the knife that I want, depending on the type of Damascus I make. And then from there, I'll surface it out to look like a normal bar stock of steel. You really won't be able to tell once I start that it's Damascus. That finish doesn't. It'll show a little bit in the raw steel. You'll see some lines, but to get this coloration, I'll take it. This is done to. This knife here was at 600 when I first etched it, soaking it in ferrochloride to reveal the harder and softer steels, and then I start hand sanding, and I go from 600 all the way up to 3200 or 3000 grit, and I'll dip in between each layer a lot of the time just to see what activity I'm getting in the metal. This was just a standard twist. It was relatively simple. One side the twist shows really well, and on the other side I'm not sure. It's got a twist, but it doesn't. It's not as well defined, which is kind of neat. It just shows that, you know, it is handmade. Sometimes it doesn't come out exactly as I think it's going to. For whatever reason, I may have twisted an opposite direction at some point, and didn't mark it to show where that was. But it ends up with a good durable finish. The way that I finished this one out, I took a lot of the black off by hand afterwards. If I took this and redipped it, everything that's that smoky gray color would turn just super black. And everything that's the shinier would stay a real high shine.
Interesting.
Okay.
It gives a flexibility to the steel, and along the cutting edge you have the different types of steel, so it's really durable. It works out really nicely.
I like it a lot. It's definitely. I was saying this earlier. It's definitely the most beautiful blade that I've. I don't know if you can see that really well on the.
Yeah, there you go.
Overhead shot.
Try to get a little light on it.
Damascus there.
Yeah, there you go.
It's gorgeous. It's a funny story too, how I ended up with this knife. You had it for. You auctioned it, right?
Yeah, I did a raffle on it.
That's it. Yeah.
For a guy in our local fire department was in a motorcycle wreck.
That's right.
And messed his leg up pretty bad. Had to have several surgeries. And our fire department was trying to figure out a way we could raise a little bit of money and kind of help out. And all of us sold some tickets. I built this knife specifically for that. The gentleman that won it is on our fire department, of all things. And he wanted to take the knife and sell it to an individual and take that money and put it back in with the rest. And Randy had messaged me asking, after buying several tickets himself.
Actually, so it's actually really funny. Howard bought a bunch of tickets because he wanted to win it.
Yeah. Okay.
And I hadn't even heard about it.
Yeah.
But David was making knives for Howard and Ryan at the studio.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I need a really good knife. And we messaged him. And then he said, actually, and then told me the story that the guy was trying to sell this. And I said, I will take it right now. And Howard got so mad because he wanted to win this thing.
Yeah.
And then I ended up with it. It was really lucky on my part.
How much would a knife like that usually run you?
In Damascus like that, normally $4.25, $4.50.
Such a beautiful knife.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a simple Damascus pattern like that, I try to keep the cost down. Now, if we get into anything really spectacular as far as Damascus, a lot more layers. The more layers I put in, a lot more time.
For sure.
Because every time I restack, I have to let it cool off. I have to grind off all the scale that's built up. That way it's bare metal to bare metal, nothing in between. If you don't, it gets an inclusion, which is a section it won't weld, and then it's just not usable for anything. So it takes a lot of time. That's why I kept this one a little bit lower, because I knew when I decided to do this, we were selling tickets and the knife wasn't fully finished yet.
Right.
It was one of those, how can we raise money? Hey, I make knives, I can do this. We came up with the idea, did some flyers, sold a lot of tickets, and luckily it turned out in the vision I had, and ended up going to someone that really enjoys it. So
Yeah, it is fantastic.
it was a good cause.
And I wish I had my other one to show, because that was definitely my favorite knife. That's the one I carried every single day. Actually, you may be able to find it on my Instagram. There's a picture of it somewhere in there.
Let's see.
But you made it out of a Farrier rasp.
Yeah.
And it was so fantastic. Perfect size to carry around. Man, I love that knife. And like an idiot, I left it in the hotel at Dallas.
Yeah, it was made from an old Nicholson Farrier's file rasp that with playing with the Nicholson files over the years, I've kind of, the heat treat on it is very similar to 1095, which is this steel here, which is my most used steel. It's one of my favorites. And part of that is I like that I can get the Hamon activity to it, not as bright as the 1075, but it's pretty close, very durable. And the rasp knives heat treat the same, and they have that detail to them of that old rasp cut in there.
Yeah.
Once you knock the teeth off and make them less aggressive, that if you take the time to clean out the holes and let that black from, I acid dip it to bring that darkness out a little bit more, and then polish the surface, it has a really old school, tough, durable look to it that it's hard to match.
It is, man.
It in one side of the knife you have the triangle notches of the file, and on the other side it has just a regular cross cut linear pattern to it.
Yeah.
Trying to look for it here.
It's a
Man, it's so rad.
I'm gonna get you another one. I have the other half of that file, so we'll see if we can't get one whipped out pretty quick. And since you still have the sheath, we'll be able to fix that problem. And
Man,
I think I still have some more of that ivory white micarta. If not, I'll get some actual vintage micarta and some of the antique ivory white and see if we can't.
It's the end of
make that happen.
2017.
Before all this, before all
Yeah,
this.
there it is.
Here we
There
go.
it is.
Ooh.
Man, I love that thing.
Yeah, what I like to look at a lot of handles on knives too, and how like smooth, and I don't know, it's crazy to me how you can just take like wood or whatever you're using, just completely smooth it out and make it feel like it's not even wood.
Yeah,
I think it's great.
That one is a white layered linen micarta that's
beautiful.
Designed to, when it's pressed, to mimic an ivory look, with a whole lot more durability, and it's a lot more cost effective. A lot of people don't like real ivory. I have some people that are 100% against it. Ivory cracks, micarta doesn't.
Yeah.
But ivory, when it's wet, still, it's one of them. It doesn't get slick in any way. Micarta kind of has a similar property that when it does get wet, if it's finished right, it's not slippery. It still has some grip to it, where a lot of your woods or antler and stuff will, if it's wet, it's slick.
I didn't realize that.
I
never thought about it.
This is a G11 on this green-handled knife,
Yeah,
and
that's
this is
what I
a
was
micarta
looking at.
here. Both these materials, this one's a canvas and this one's more of a linen. When wet, they don't slide out of the hand like one of these would, where it's a nice high polished finished wood. This one wouldn't get as slick because it isn't as high polished, and this one might not, but these, you'll notice that they're wet.
Yeah.
This is just, it's super tough.
See this big green
Yeah,
guy.
I was going to look at that one too.
It's a really durable, tough finish. That material I bought from a guy in Mississippi who worked at a factory as a maintenance man, and they were redoing a bunch of their old electrical panels. And Westinghouse Company used to make that as an insulator from high voltage electricity to the metal frame, so that way it doesn't conduct, so that if a wire for whatever reason ever touched it, it wouldn't electrify the building or the box that they're working in.
Interesting.
And when they go through, there's all different colors in those, and he just happened to come across a bunch of the jade green, and so for pennies on the dollar to what it would normally sell for, I bought a box of it and have used a little bit. It really makes you itch when you grind it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
And
insulating like that.
Yeah, and it's horrible to breathe.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything I do, I wear a respirator if any grinding's involved, because it's a hobby I don't want to kill me young.
Right.
But it
Black lung.
yeah, it finishes out so nice and has a good grip to it that and it's as close to indestructible as anything I've ever put on a knife.
Yeah, I'm digging the green.
It's a really nice color. They make a lighter shade that's a ghost jade, and I have some of it as well. But I have to be careful using it, because I will lighten the tang of my handle if I don't taper them. I'll drill several small holes through it to get some of that weight out. And with the ghost jade, if you hold it up to the light, you'll see through where the holes are. You can see the light come through.
Really?
And on one like this, I really wanted the green to stand alone with the bronze, and
It does. That's a good combo.
Yeah, I'm digging that.
I was originally going to use copper up top, and I just didn't think that it had as much with this Hamon. I thought the bronze had a little bit more detail to it.
Is there anything you look for in particular when you're looking at handle material?
A lot of the time I will look, depending on the knife. I have a shelf full at the house. If it's for a customer, if they're wanting to stick with a color scheme, if they like a darker wood, of course that plays into it. And I'm looking for stability. All the handle material that I use for the most part has been stabilized, which is vacuum sealing in a heat activated resin, and it's done under vacuum and then under pressure.
Is that a process you do or a process you have done?
I have it done, and I can do it. I'm set up to do it in my shop. This piece I did. This piece was bought already stabilized. This one I didn't buff out to the high shine finish that I normally would, that this one at one time had before it's been handled for the last couple of years. And I left this a little bit coarser because I wanted the grip to it. And what that does is keeps the moisture from ever soaking into the wood. It also, if there's any softer spots or the grain change in the wood, like this burl, all the grain, instead of being linear, it's twisted and curled and laid over itself. That can create a brittle spot or a softer spot of weak grain. And when you stabilize that, it takes a lot of that out of the equation.
Okay.
It's almost like it's kind of like a glue in there, that when you heat it up, it activates it and cures out, and it makes this wood. When you take a block like this before you stabilize it, it'll weigh ounces, and when you're done, you can have a good sized block, almost a pound. It'll double and triple, and even sometimes more, depending on the softness of the wood. It gains a lot of weight, and it'll go from being able to scratch it with a fingernail to where you need something metal to actually put an indentation in it.
So really, you're just taking it from porous to non-porous, essentially?
Yeah, it fills all the voids and makes it to where it locks it together a little bit better.
Do you have to do that with bone or like antler?
A lot of my antler I will go on and stabilize, and a handle like this that's a solid piece of antler, or any of my scaled antlers, which I don't have any here, I will go in with a rotary tool and drill out the center, and then any of the porous areas of the antler I remove, and leave the harder outer pieces. And this is after I stabilize it. Once I get antler vacuumed to where it's no longer bubbling rapidly, in the stabilizing solution, and then I'll take it out to put it in a small oven and heat it to activate the resin. I like to take acetone and wipe all the stabilizing agent from the outside of the material, because I don't want it'll shine real heavy, and I don't like a lot of shine on my antler.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Makes it look a lot faker, I would imagine.
Yeah, it just, it's too much for me. And instead of having to go back and clean it out afterwards, I'll stand it up. I've got a little stand, and I'll stand that antler up on there and then wrap it in some foil to keep it from getting hot spots, and let it sit in the oven that way and heat up, and then any of the excess will drip out the bottom. And then when I go back in and clean all that out, all the porous material, or what was porous, I'll clean as much of it out as I can. And then the inside of the handle, I will take a 2-part moldable putty and fill the inside of the handle, and then slide the tang in coated in Vaseline, and that way it makes a channel for that handle to fit in there, that tang of the knife to fit in there and square up everything nice and even, and then slide it back out and let it cure. And then I can take a file if I need to open up anywhere, but it gives that perfect fitment to where later down the road, when I go to gluing all this together, I use just a minimal amount of epoxy. Okay. And it adds weight back to the end of the handle, which will help with balance. Will make a knife feel lighter if it's balanced. But it takes all that porous material out of the equation, so that way you don't have to worry about anything shifting over time, or from chopping it wearing in a spot or anything like that.
That's something else I just thought of. Before you even start making the knife, like, do you plan on the handle material and, like, I guess the blade width and things like that, so it does have a good balance?
Right.
Because I feel that's pretty important, right?
Yeah, it's extremely important. A lot of the time, I will take, like on this particular knife here, when I built this one, I wanted to build a knife similar to what a knife maker from Washington State makes, named Nick Wheeler. Does a lot of videos and teaching online and classes. And this was a knife similar to one of his designs. And I took the stock material before I forged it, the guard material, and the handle, and kind of weighed them and kind of played around figuring up how much I would lose weight wise once I forged this out. It started off as a piece of metal about this long, that I figured the tang and everything else, and kind of got an idea of how thin I needed to make this to have the balance. It's still blade heavy a little bit, but it's not so much that you can't find the balance point. Pretty close to where the guard is.
Right.
On a knife with a handle this, or a blade this long and a handle this size, it's a smaller handled knife. I wanted it to where I could still balance it without getting out here too far, to where if it feels heavy out front, it's going to tire you out, even if it isn't a very big knife.
Sure.
Balance is, to me, is one of the most important parts of the design, not just visually, but in the hand. Everything needs to fit together, to where I don't like a really short blade and a really long handle, or
right.
a handle that looks like I can fit two hands on it on a 10-inch bladed knife.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I want everything to kind of line up in my idea. Now, I have smaller hands, so occasionally I will build a handle that is for a guy with a hand my size. It's a bad habit of mine I've tried to get away from. You can see, I mean, there's a lot of handle difference between a knife I built for me and a knife I would build to sell to the general public.
Right. Maybe that's one of the things that actually works in my favor, and why I like your knife so much. I also have these tiny little hands.
Yeah. I do ask people a lot if they want me to build them a knife, what size glove do you wear? And they think that's a little odd, and I'm like, well, I'm asking that because if you wear a large and a medium glove, then I can build you a knife that fits, because I know my hand is a large, medium large, somewhere in there.
Right.
If you need an extra large glove, then I'm going to have to add a little here and there, make a little wider. It plays a big part in my knife that I build for me may not, if someone comes by and picks up, they're going to think, well, that's a little bit of a small handle. Well, it may be for them because it's my knife.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But if it's one I build to sell to the public with the intentions of selling it, then hopefully they pick it up and think it fits like a glove.
That's the trick. That's what makes a good knife, right?
Yeah.
One that feels great.
Yeah, it needs to be comfortable.
Right. The one that I showed you that I'm carrying now, that's the problem that I have with it. It's got that little blade, way too long of a handle. It just doesn't feel right.
Yeah. Yeah, and a knife with a really short blade, I like to consider like a 3-fingered knife. It's something that when you're using it, you're going to be something like it'll be shorter handled than this, but you're going to be having that handle slid down when you're working with it, especially if you're in the kitchen or processing game or just trimming a steak. You're not going to be choked up on it as much. Because you're going to be using this section of the blade more than anything.
Right.
That's where most of the work's done on any kind of kitchen or hunting knife if it's a smaller bladed knife. I mean, I do all my work up here. So I like to make something that you can choke up on and not have so much handle sticking out the back.
Right.
That it gets in the way of being what you want it to be.
There is a lot that goes into making a knife.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of trial and error for me. I find a knife I like that someone else has made. I see a lot of people that really get upset if someone was to take an original knife of theirs, what they would consider an original knife, and copy it. To me, if you copy a knife someone else makes, it's kind of like flattery.
Sure.
I can see that,
if
sure.
I develop a knife or come up with something that I think is pretty original that I enjoy making, and I see someone make one similar, if they're not trying to market it as something that I built, and I have no issues with it.
And it's got to be pretty hard to be original considering how many knives are out there,
right?
In general, right?
Yeah, I mean it's one of the oldest tools,
right?
I mean, they started knapping flint and making knives before there was steel.
Also, some shapes just work better for certain jobs.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, a hunting knife is a hunting knife. I mean, it's that simple.
Right.
Something that, like a Bowie knife, I mean, in today's time, there's not as much use practically for us to carry a Bowie knife. People that hog hunt, people that do a lot of camping, something like that might be in their wheelhouse of what they're wanting to carry. But if you want a knife that you're going to carry every day, something more like this really simple, plain, contoured handled hunter, not the prettiest blade shape, very effective. The handle on this one is one of my favorites.
I've been eyeballing that handle. It does look
right.
Very.
I took a 3-day tour of a knife maker in Conway shop by the name of Alan Hutchins, and he builds that handle on most of his hunters. He helped me lay that handle out, come up with the shape. It's a blade that we forged at the Big Buck Classic when I really started getting into forging, and we built that knife together in his shop, and it was the first knife that I finished for the handle. When I was done with it, every knife I build, that knife usually stays on my bench. And whether it's a big knife, small knife, I look at that handle, and everything in that handle came out so well that it's one of those I use it kind of as inspiration to whatever I'm building. When I built this big chopping knife, it's still got that swell on the bottom. It's got this hourglass radius here. It's a little more raised in this section, same as here, not as defined, and then it tapers just a little before the guard. This one, same thing. It was the first handle that I built that when it fit in my hand, I thought, well, that's perfect. So I never marked it I have no intention of. I won't sell it. It just stays on my table, and I cut string and everything I'm working on. It's used as everything to a paint scraper to, you know.
Now, is there something you get like requested a lot that is just kind of, I don't know, like something that doesn't really work functionally, like more kind of like fashion over function?
Yeah. For my style of building, I get a lot of requests for more of a Japanese style, like the sharp edge, like the Tonto style knife that has the hard edges in the blade edge. I've done a few of them. It's not a knife I enjoy building. It's a knife I'm capable of building. It just, if I'm building something even for money, it has to be something that speaks to me. And that when I'm done, I mean, it's my mark going on it, my name to a point.
Right.
That I have to be happy with it. I've built some ugly knives for money. Some knives that today I probably wouldn't build. But if they have a good reason for that design, if I see that it holds the purpose that they want, then I'll build any of them. If it's something that I just can't get behind, a lot of the time I will recommend them to someone whose work is of that style or that I trust. You know, I'll try to point them in the right direction. But that Japanese style isn't necessarily my style.
Yeah.
I kind of like the traditional contoured handle, more of the Western style.
See if you can find that style he's talking about. I don't know.
What kind of knife should I look up?
Any of the Tonto knives, a lot of the time will show up that way.
What about like materials? Like I know you said ivory is one of those that, like, you know, it looks nice, but it's not very functional.
Yeah.
Do you get a lot of requests like that too?
I have people wanting to use like mammoth tooth and stuff like that from time to time.
What?
Yeah, it's really beautiful. It looks great on a show knife. I know several guys that trusted enough to use it on a knife that they will everyday carry. I don't work in it. It's very expensive, and it chips and it cracks, and I think a lot of the guys that do work with it are really good at piecing it back together.
You'd have
kind of
to
thing.
be,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not like they're coming up with new mammoth tooth all the time.
Yeah, right.
and it's one of those materials that I have a little bit of, and I've played with it here and there, but it's nothing that would leave my shop because it's not something that I'm comfortable with yet.
Yeah.
I do a lot of, during hunting season and up to hunting season, I do a lot of antler.
Sure.
I'm not a fan of antler myself personally. I like horns, ram's horns, stuff like that. Smells terrible to work with. Looks great.
I never even thought about that.
Most of the knives that I have made by other makers who I admire are ram's horn knives. I have several, and they're beautiful, and I love the feel of it. I love everything about it. I don't work in it myself very often because I hate the way it smells.
Yeah.
But I am more than happy to order one from someone else in it. It's one of those materials that is durable. It's tough. It stinks up the whole shop for days when you work in it. Antler is that way too. It smells like burning hair because it's keratin.
Right.
But I can get through it.
Yeah.
Ram's horn, some of the old mammoth ivory and stuff like that smell doesn't go away for a long period of time.
Yeah, I never.
I
Really
can't even
think about
imagine.
that.
Yeah, it's one of those that you just keep the respirator on the whole day and keep working.
Man.
You know, and that's one of the things I think some guys that are getting into the hobby or the craft forget about thinking about is everything you're doing in your shop, you're breathing. You know, there's some old school makers. Bob Lovelace was one. A lot of the time on his knife videos and stuff, because he was filming a video, I don't know if he did personally in his shop, wear a respirator. That stuff that you breathe in doesn't come back out. I mean, it's not like eating it. I mean,
some of that shit's hardcore too, man. And the gases that form from the chemicals, acids, man.
These micartas are very, very hard on you to breathe. The wood itself, I wouldn't think, like ironwood and stuff like that, I have trouble with because I have an allergy to the oils in the wood. Bacote is one of my favorite woods to work with because it's the prettiest. In my opinion, the colors of it are phenomenal. It's just yellow and brown, but it's bright. I can't work in it. I've used it 5 or 6 times. The last time I used it, I couldn't see for 2 days because my eyes swelled shut.
What?
The oil in it does not agree with me.
Oh my God.
Given it all the way. It was one of those, I didn't even want to accidentally pick a piece of it up. I had to clean my whole shop afterwards, which is a nightmare. You know, my shop is a mess, and it stays that way. I don't know how I get anything done in there. But when I had to clean the whole shop, the last time I used it, that was it for me. I was done. There's certain woods I avoid for those reasons. Even with a face mask, respirator, the whole 9, I still can't see it the next day.
Wow.
That's something I never thought about either.
Me either.
I think a lot of knife makers find out there are odd things you would never think you would be allergic to. You're allergic to.
Wow.
And, the first time I used it, I itched a little. And I was like, oh, that's kind of odd. I may have gotten into some poison ivy because it was springtime. And I'd been working in the yard, and I didn't think much of it. And then by the time it was done, it was a real rash. And I was like, that's really odd. Like, I don't think I got in poison ivy that well.
Right.
Because it was up my neck.
Ooh.
And it was down both arms. And I thought, well, that's weird. The second time I used it, my eyes started swelling and itching, and I thought, well, that's something I'm working with. And I hadn't pinpointed what it was yet. I thought maybe it was a new epoxy or something like that, something actually chemical. And then the third time I used it, my eyes swelled shut, and I was like, it's that wood.
My God.
I took some of the dust and rubbed it on my hand just to check, and I got like a blister right there, and I was like, yep, that is never going in my shop again.
Get that out.
Took it all and gave it to a friend of mine.
Imagine, man, that's crazy. So, is this one of the Tonto knives that you're talking about up here?
Yeah, that's a style that
I got you now. Yeah.
I don't know. It's a great knife. It serves a function. It doesn't serve a function that I want to build.
Right.
Now the more traditional Japanese style that doesn't have that hard line at the top of the tip where it drops into the tip, I will make them and happily make them because I like the way the lines of that flow. To me, that visually isn't something that I'm drawn to because of the hard lines. I like sweeping, flowing lines when I'm building.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if the money was right, sure, I'd build one.
Right.
But I would rather recommend someone that really enjoys that style and builds them regularly, that isn't going to throw 2 or 3 away before they're done.
Right.
I'm
with you,
to
though.
build with someone. I mean,
It's just not quite as visually appealing. Not to me personally.
Yeah.
yeah, it's cool to me. I mean, I like it. I think it's a good looking knife. It's just not something that is going to excite me in the shop and make me go, man, I can't wait to finish this. And I need that sometimes because a lot of what I build, if it is for a customer, it's a knife that usually I've designed or come up with, and they may pick a certain handle material, or they may want no hamon on it or a hamon or something to where it's different than the last one I built. So usually the excitement of seeing it when it's finished and that I made it makes me want to get in the shop and do the work. If it's something where it's just really bland and it's not doing much for me, it might take me weeks to finish it.
Right.
Just because I have to get myself in the mood to go work on this knife. It becomes work and less of a hobby at that point.
It's the same way when I'm drawing a tattoo that I don't want to draw.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is going to take forever because I don't want to do it.
I
think anybody that has an art form that they enjoy, if someone pays you to paint a mural and it's nothing, you can paint it, but it's nothing of your style that you're going to enjoy, you're going to paint it for the money, but it may, every time you look at it, it just may not speak to you. It you're not necessarily not happy that you made it or embarrassed by it, but at the same time, it doesn't it doesn't bring out, and that was a great job.
Right.
Like, I'm really pleased with the way this came out. I mean, this knife right here is one that every time I look at it, I'm excited with it. I don't know why. It's like I said, it's based off a Nick Wheeler design, and I think that it's just more of a traditional kind of Bowie, what people think of a Bowie knife. But to me, this is what I want to build. Any of these others that I look at, I mean, there's some nice knives out there. This knife, I like building these. Most of what I like about this is the handle that I turned into this. I mean, I took that same style, traditional style, and was able to put it into this with the double guard, or the rear facing guard too, and the bigger blade. And these are the knives that when people do order them, I get excited to build. I get real excited for hunter stuff of this size too. I enjoy building them. I just finished one that's on my Instagram and my Facebook page that was a actual antler handle. It was scaled antler, and it was a flat tang. It's a forged tail. It's got a little tail, blacksmithy looking tail on the end of it. It's a great knife. I really enjoyed building it for the guy. It's one of the standard hunter forged tail hunters that I make several of every year, and it was a knife that I grew up, started playing with. Really liked the way it came out. Every time I build one, I enjoy building it because none of them ever come out identical, as far as handle and all that. So every time I put one together, I can change up the pins. Every one of them has 7 pins in it. It's just the original drawing had 7 pins. They all get 7 pins. Sometimes that's a nightmare. Instead of using Corby's or anything like that, which is a mechanical fastener like this and these, I just put a single pin in it. Or 7 smooth individual pins, because it's a smaller knife. It's not going to be beat on, abused. It should. My warranty on my knives is my lifetime, and any of them should last 4 or 5 times that, with a little bit of oil and a little bit of care.
Yeah.
If anything was, I have yet to have a knife returned, but if it did happen, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, everybody, if they drop it, whatever. I've had a few I've had to clean up. Guys go camping. Hey, I threw that knife in the sheath after I fell in the river, whatever, in the lake. And then I forgot about it under my truck seat for a few weeks, and it's a big ball of rust.
Ooh.
I've had to fix many of those. I had to fix a Damascus one of those last year. It takes a little bit of time, but it's nice to take an old knife, a knife I built years ago, and restore it too. I mean, usually I try to take care of them on it. But
that's a pretty good track record, though, to not have anything go bad, other than somebody just not taking care of.
Yeah, I've resharpened a few. I forged a knife for a guy local to my area that hog hunts, deer hunts. I forged it out of a piece of 1095 bar stock that I had there at the house. He works in a cabinet shop part-time with his father-in-law. And I had gotten some quarter sawn oak from that shop a year before, that they had given me. And he told me, I just want a simple hunting knife. It doesn't have to be any frills, no fancy, just full tang, whatever you want to make. So I forged a simple knife for them that I was pretty happy with. I did a little bit of a hamon on it just in case he bound it up in a joint or in the bone, because he told me what he was going to do with it, specifically processing. And I used some of that quarter sawn oak. I stabilized it and darkened it before I stabilized it, put it on the knife, sent it to him. He sent me a long message through Facebook Messenger and said, man, he said, I cleaned a 250-pound hog and 3 deer with this knife, and had to take it to a strope and just refine the edge, and went back and cleaned another deer. He said, I made it through the whole season and haven't had to really sharpen it,
Damn.
just touch up the edge, without ever putting it on a stone, paper, anything like that. I want a bigger version of this knife. So that's one that he's not in a hurry for. I need to get out there and get to forging and get one built. But those are the knives that I enjoy building that don't go on a shelf, that I know he's going to take it, put it to the test, and then let me know if there's an issue. If it didn't work out, I'd have been just as, not necessarily as happy to hear it, but I would have been glad to know where the issue was and what needed to be corrected. And instead he says, man, this is great.
Yeah.
And it did all this work. He said 2 of the guys I work with had their knives out, and he said they were just store-bought, decent little knives. He said, but they were dull and didn't make it through. He said, so we just finished up with this, and that's why I build these,
Yeah.
It's going to be great to hear.
Someone's going to work with it,
Yeah. That little one I had, I mean, I don't do much with nothing like cleaning a hog or deer or anything, but never had any trouble out of that thing. Fantastic.
Do you watch any like knife making shows, like any like Forged in Fire, like anything like that?
I do. I actually, there's a lot of guys I think that don't necessarily like Forged in Fire because it makes it look easy.
That's what I was going to ask you about. Yeah.
But if you've ever sat down and forged one, then you know that what they're doing in that restrictive time frame is impressive. I mean, and there's been a few knives on there that I've thought, geez, that's kind of ugly.
Well, yeah.
But if I'm sitting there in a 3-hour time window and I've got 4 guys who know what they're doing, or 2 of the 4 that know what they're doing, looking at me and going, and with 3 other guys standing around me that I know are good at what they do too, under pressure, I don't know that I could do it.
Yeah.
I mean,
really, huh?
It's one of those things that in my shop, I know where everything is.
Right.
I know what I'm working with. I don't have any crazy things that come up like, oh, you're gonna have to make a handle out of this whiskey barrel, or the steel you're gonna use is somewhere on this old Ford pickup.
Right.
I mean, I've played with enough of that stuff to feel pretty confident in what I would pick to use. But at the same time, I wouldn't do it in my shop.
Right.
I've had people bring me leaf spring and go, this is off my grandpa's old truck. I want you to make me a knife out of it. I'll do that. But I know going in, I have a little bit longer to plan for this.
Sure.
I think that show has brought a lot of people into knife making that really never would have pushed themselves to get into it. And I think it's great. The only downside for me personally is a lot of the equipment has gone up. The old anvils have gone from $1.25, $2 a pound to $4, $5, $6, up to, I've seen some as high as $8 a pound, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. Especially when you're talking about a anvil.
Yeah.
That ain't light.
No, a 250-pound anvil. I watched one sell for $1,200 the other day, and I'm thinking, I'm glad I bought mine when I did.
Yeah.
They don't make. There's a few companies that make anvils, but they don't make a lot of them, and they are expensive. The old ones, I've had good luck with all the old ones I've had. And that show brought a lot of stuff that people probably had in their flower beds or in their grandpa's old shop that was sitting out rusting. Get it out, clean it up, and start using it. And I think that's cool. It's gotten a lot of young people into it.
Yeah.
Which was something that, 10 years ago when I started looking into doing this, and 8 years ago when I started going to some of the events and watching these guys build knives, I was one of the younger guys there. And now to go down to Texarkana to any of their stuff at their bladesmithing classes or any of their demos or any of that, I'm about middle of the road, and I think that's pretty cool. There's people bringing their kids that are there because they want to learn too. I think that show alone brought back knife making to be where it's not going to fade out. And there for a while, it got to where there were so few knife makers that really took the time and made quality knives that it was a dying art, and now it's breathed a lot of life back into it. And I think for that purpose alone, the show's awesome. There's been a lot of guys from Arkansas compete on it, which I think is really cool. And there's been some guys from Arkansas that have people try to talk into doing it. They're like, not doing it. They do, the show doesn't speak to them. And a lot of them have enough business. They don't need to do it.
Right. I feel like that's a hard sell anyway. That's pressure like that makes compelling TV, but man, that's tough.
And the business they get afterwards is great. I mean, there's a lot of incentives to go on the show. Sean Ellis out of Mountain View, who's a friend of mine, went on there and really, I think that it took, he's a Journey Smith knife maker, so he's really good already. But it took his orders beyond where I think he ever thought they would be. And I think that's awesome. Especially for a guy like Sean that's a really good maker, and a lot of people know him from the knife magazines and stuff like that, and from going to classes and things. He's always up for learning new stuff, advancing what he's building, advancing the equipment in his shop, techniques, and to see him go on there and know that he did really well, he won. But then to see the fallout afterwards of the positive side of it, that he's getting more business, he's getting more recognized at events and stuff. I think that's really cool, and it's got people to where they're calling these guys who are normally just regular old knife makers. They enjoy what they're doing, and having people come in and go, hey, I want to see how you did this, and they want to come in and learn from them in their shop, and it's getting more people involved that aren't risking burning their house down doing it to start like I did. I mean, when I got into it, it was kind of on a whim thing. I had a friend that made knives that I worked with, and I'd ordered a few from him, and I thought what he was building was pretty neat. And he gave me a piece of metal one day and said, why don't you try making one yourself? And I did, and I still have that knife. It's not the prettiest knife in the world, but it's still sharp. And I went from making one to the next week I was making another one, and then I was spending way too much money on equipment to start putting in my shop. And,
like you do when you find something you like.
Yeah.
Like you do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
that's exactly what happened here.
Yes.
It ended up being one of those where 6 years into it, I'm almost broke even. And now I can consider myself make a little money when I do build something to sell. It's not enough, but it's enough to get me in the shop and still enjoy what I'm doing. And I mean, I don't think a lot of people think about the cost that goes into it. I mean, an anvil is, in the grand scheme of things, it's a piece of equipment you'll use forever. It's not that expensive. Hammers aren't that expensive, but the grinder I use was not cheap. $2,600, and then every belt that I throw on there is anywhere from $3 to $18, depending on what I'm using. And
which are consumable and wear out.
Right. Building a knife like this, I mean, I go through 8-9 belts at $3 to $12 a piece for this one. From handle shaping. If I'm doing a handle on a knife, it's got to be a fresh, clean belt, especially something light colored or lighter colored that's going to pick up anything that was on it before. Because once you grind it in there, you don't get it out without spending hours hand sanding it.
Right.
I mean, the perishables that go into a shop are extensive. Just in paper towels, people wouldn't believe how much you spend.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I use Blue Scott's shop towels, and if I touch it to something, I throw it away. I have a trash can just full of shop towels. I mean, it's one of those. You have to like doing it. They say if you want to make $1 million building knives, then you need to start with $2 million.
Sure.
I mean, and that's part of what makes it fun, though, is seeing if I can build a knife good enough that I might make a few dollars here and there. If I figured up my hours and I made $4 an hour, I'd be doing good in my shop.
Yeah, that's the big thing. That's, I mean, just from what we've talked about so far, all that goes into it, not even counting the equipment you've bought, the consumables you have to replace constantly. That's so much time.
Yeah,
it's so much time, so much thought.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I'll price a knife to some people, and some people, especially people that work with their hands, that are craftsmen of some kind, whether it be, you know, they build houses, or they draw, or they work on old cars, whatever they do, if they have some understanding of the, not just the amount of time, but the amount of learning you had to do to get there. A knife that I can make now in a day may have taken me a year to figure out how to do that in a day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, I may have had to build 20 of them last year to figure out the fastest way to do it now. That plays into pricing for me, just like your tattooing probably does. I mean,
Yep.
when you first started, you're slow.
Yeah.
I mean, I think everybody that starts anything, you have to start slow.
Mm-hmm.
You got to
Absolutely.
crawl before you walk, and dang sure before you run.
Yep.
And then to get out there and to be able to do a tattoo in hours, what would have taken you a couple sessions, you know, just for your sake of it. Knife making's the same way. I mean, I can build this knife in a couple days, to where when I built it, it took me, you know, a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, because I took my time. I wanted to walk through it slowly and figure out every step of the process to make it repeatable.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the things that I enjoy, making one-off knives. A lot of these I've only built one of. I've only built this one once, this one once, this one, this one. You know, and a lot of that is because I enjoy the challenge of trying to do something different,
Mm-hmm.
and to pick up new steps along the way. Now, I might watch 5 YouTube videos, or talk to 3 or 4 different makers on the way they do something. Doing this knife here with that bolt and the pivot in it, and doing the end cap like I did. There's a master smith knife maker here in Arkansas, named Lynn Ray, who teaches at the Arkansas Historical Museum. He's their resident blacksmith. On Tuesdays, they have a group of knife makers and guys that get together down there, and they do some educational stuff. Some of the guys bring their projects. He forges stuff. He lets those guys forge on their old coal forge there. After I hurt my arm and had some time off, I spent a lot of Tuesdays down there learning a lot. Building this knife, before I did this pivot style, the year before when I started this, he and I met up at the Little Rock Knife Show, and he drew on a piece of paper how he does this same style hinge section, and what bolt he uses, and how to go about doing it. And I took that and him drawing it on a piece of paper, and carried it into my shop, and spent hours figuring out the way he did it and the way I was going to do it. And you know, that's one of the most enjoyable things about this is that you occasionally get guys that are in a craft that don't want to show exactly how they do something.
Right.
But in knife making, I've found 99 out of every 100 guys you talk to want to sit down and will draw you a picture in the middle of a show and say, this is how I did it. They'll pull up a video and show you on their phone, or photos of the step-by-step process, because they want that technique to be used elsewhere, and they want to see it carry on, which is really fun. I mean, if it weren't for a lot of the guys when I first started doing this being willing to let me come in their shop and show me stuff, I probably would have burned out on it.
Yeah. I enjoy that about like a lot of creative kind of pastimes, you know.
Yeah.
Is like it's all love, you know. If you find someone with the same interest as you know, they had to start somewhere too, and
Right.
they understand that, and they're like, here.
Especially starting out, you need guidance
For sure.
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
anything. In anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's few hobbies that I've found that you have, it's worldwide, it's not one language. You know, you're tattooing, they do it everywhere.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, on every continent. And you don't have to speak the same language to be able to sit and watch someone build something, or to draw something, or to tattoo something, and learn something from what the technique they're using.
Right.
And that's one of the coolest things on this is they make knives everywhere.
Mhm.
They use them everywhere. there's a group in South Africa that started an African bladesmithing society, and they've really gotten it up and running in the last few years. And Niels Vandenberg that started it, who teaches classes every week. I mean, he runs his own business and building knives, building custom knives, and building what we would consider more of a mid-tech. It's his design, and he's got guys building them for him in his shop with his approval. And he oversees parts of the building and does some of it himself. He teaches knife making there in Africa, and it's one of those things that's really starting to blow up there. They're having cutting competitions, and they're teaching classes and doing all that, and they do it all over the world. There's an Australian knife making association and places everywhere, and not all of them speak English. There's guys in Japan that are just phenomenal, inlaying gold and things that I can't even imagine trying to learn to work with, that they're detailing into their knives that are unreal. Andrew Mears inlays pieces that he hand carves out of gold, silver, and lays them into knives. And I mean, they're some of the prettiest knives I've ever seen, and they're usable. That's the coolest thing about a lot of what he builds, and is that it looks good. You pay for it because of the looks, but
Sure.
you could still take it in your kitchen and go to work with it. It's usable art, and I think that's what drew me into a lot of this, was that there's a lot of art knives out there that are really cool to look at, but you could still go work with it. I don't have the desire to build anything that fancy, but I think the fact that guys that they're pushing the limits on that is really cool.
Yeah,
For sure.
definitely.
It's gotten beyond where I ever thought it would be. And getting into it, you start seeing a lot more of it when you really do some looking. There's some guys that I haven't heard of, years ago, that have only been making knives a few years that are doing phenomenal folders, and I make the occasional folder and stuff, but these fixed bladed traditional style knives are just really what I enjoy. But a lot of your folder makers are going into really interesting techniques and really neat materials like titanium and stuff that I don't use a lot. I mean, I've played with titanium some. It's hard to cut, hard to grind.
Right.
It's really hard to forge. But to see what some of these guys do making frames and one-off custom knives with it, it's neat. It keeps me interested. I mean, it pushes me to want to try some of the new stuff out there. I might not ever show anyone how it turned out, but I'm going to try it,
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah. Draw some sketches you toss afterwards.
Yeah, maybe no one should ever see this.
I might have built a knife or two like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's how you learn, right?
Yeah.
That's part of the draw, the challenge.
I learn more
Part
from
of what's
mistakes than I do from getting it
course.
right.
Exactly.
Of course.
Exactly.
Mhm.
That's
But-
100% the truth. So, you're right-handed.
Yep.
You started making knives, and then shit hit the fan.
Yep.
Let's get into some of that. How far were you into making knives before this happened?
About 8.5 years into building knives.
Solid into it.
Solid into it. Forged everything right-handed. Did everything right-handed. Used to, I would grind a blade on my grinder, and I can still use my right hand some, but I don't have the strength in it, and I don't have the range of motion in it that I did, or my arm. And I would grind a blade, and I would grind one side up, belt coming across, and then I would flip the knife over and grind it upside down, the opposite. And I did that because if I ground this way and then went to this hand and ground it this way, it always ended up different. So I figured out that I could grind just as well, all right-handed, doing it opposite. One side up, one side down. Knives turned out good. This knife I actually ground that way. And, this one and that one. I would grind them one way and then flip them. Now, this little one I ground this side and then switched and did it this way. And then I had to do a lot of cleaning up to get it back the way I wanted it by hand. I have a couple of titanium pieces in my where there should be bone.
Yeah.
A metal.
This gnarly
Scar, man.
Little
and your
scratch.
elbow. Let's yeah. So what happened? Give us the play by play here.
I fell, and when I did, I put my hand to catch myself, and ended up not getting my hand to the ground. And so when I hit the ground, I broke the back 2.5-3 inches of my elbow into about 21 pieces, and tore the ligaments on upper and lower part of my arm. It dislocated my arm too, and then got a fun ride to the hospital. Spent a day there, bounced around to 3 different hospitals. Finally found a doctor willing to do surgery. They did 2 surgeries. Still didn't have the use of the arm when I would go to take the brace off and all that, and they wanted to see what I had. My arm would come out of place at my elbow.
Oh, shit.
So they took me back in to another doctor here in Little Rock, and did a third surgery that took about 4.5 hours.
And what were they doing? Just trying to piece like your elbow back together?
Yeah, they were trying to get it to actually start to heal. Every time they put it together, they pinned it and screwed it and did all that. Sections of the bone weren't growing back. And I don't have brittle bones. I just hit just right.
Right.
But they were having issues with as much damage as there was and the bruising to the bone that it didn't want to heal. So the back section of the elbow here was, they took my other arm bone and cut the head of it off and put a titanium replacement in that bone. And then this section here back was made out of that, grafted in. And then I have bone from somebody else that they grafted in with it. And once they did that and got that stabilized, they did this up here. That was in order to get to part of that bone, which removed a section of muscle here and a section of muscle here. That has made it to where I don't have strength in this hand.
Right.
I have feeling in these 2 fingers, normal feeling, just like this hand. These 3 fingers, I feel stuff, but it's like my hand's asleep all the time.
Right.
Pretty well this line up my arm, I have some feeling here. I don't have much of any feeling along this side. I can kind of feel that I touch that, but if I hit something or anything like that, I don't notice it. Where the scar is especially, I have no feeling along yet. When I first decided that I was going to continue knife making, this was the last knife I finished before I messed my arm up, big knife that I still have. I made a few small hunters and stuff that, and I have a few still not finished there in the shop from before. This was the first knife that I did after. I did this knife on the hammer, left-handed on the power hammer. It's why I used it so much. And then I figured out that if I took a zip tie and I clamped this knife in a pair of long tongs, and I took a zip tie and cinched it tight, I could hold on with these 2 fingers enough to those tongs that I could forge the bevels in that blade. And that's how I beveled that knife, was cutting a lot of zip ties out there in my shop, forging a little, throwing it back up there to get hot, grab a new zip tie. Wow. Zip tie those tongs and pick it up with the 2 fingers. And I couldn't rotate at that time my hand, so I would have to use my left hand and turn them, and then I could hold it wherever I wanted and keep working it.
How far after your surgeries was this process?
I waited, let's see, once I got the all clear from my doctor to pretty well try to resume normal activity, it was about 3 days after that.
How long from the accident?
What was that? From the original accident, it was probably 6 months.
Man.
before I got the all clear to try to do stuff. I had the first surgery, and then it was 4 weeks until I had the second surgery. I had that surgery, and then I think it was 5 weeks until I had the third surgery, and then a whole lot of physical therapy and all that just to be able to open and close my hand. For the longest time, I could bend my fingers about like that, and that was it on these two. This one, my index finger came back pretty quick, and my thumb took a little while. I could bend my thumb up here, but I couldn't bring my thumb down, and I still can't get it as far as I used to could, but it's there.
Yeah.
I can do left-handed stuff with my right hand. I had to teach myself how to swing a hammer left-handed. By far the strangest thing I've ever tried to.
Yeah.
In thought, it wouldn't be that bad. But actually sitting down, and I'm standing on the opposite side of the anvil. I have the horn facing the wrong way on the anvil. When I think about where I need to position myself, I still want to go to that right side of the anvil and stand over there. And then I have to realize real quick that I'm on the wrong side. So I had to turn everything in my shop around. Like as positioning, my forge is still to where it's on my right side, which is aggravating because I reach across to get stuff. And if I'm working anything that's heavy, I'll have to grab it left-handed and then put it in my right once I get it down to my side. I don't have the strength in the hand to pick up certain things. I still don't have all the rotation in it to where I can flip stuff when I'm forging. If I want to do one side and then the other, I'll do one side and then I'll still use my left hand to turn it, and then I can work it the rest of the way. But it's better than expected.
Yeah.
The hardest part has been not getting so aggravated I throw stuff like a girl with my left hand.
Yeah.
Because throwing stuff right-handed across the shop was easy. Left-handed, it lands 2 feet. It doesn't go far enough away to not make me still mad,
Yeah.
But
maybe even madder, right?
Yeah. It's like that should have gone farther. It's been challenging, but I still want to be in my shop.
Yeah.
I mean, it was one of those things when I first did it, I thought, well, that's over. I'm laying there at the hospital, woke up from surgery, and I thought, how am I going to do this? And I really started getting serious about getting back in the shop and seeing what I could do with this left hand. I went to the river one day, and I was sitting there, and I thought, I'm going to fly fish left-handed. And I thought, if I can fly fish left-handed, I can forge a knife left-handed. And I hooked myself 4 times that day and finally figured out fishing left-handed to where I only hook myself once a trip now.
Hey.
So I'm like, I can do
Progress.
this.
Hey.
Baby
Took
steps.
me about a month to get to where I only hook myself rarely. And I was like, I can do this.
Yeah.
So I caught a few fish, and I thought, well, tomorrow when I get up, I'm going to go out there in the shop, and I'm going to see what I can get done. And I started just using mild steel. I didn't want to scrap anything, and I was just playing with some old railroad spikes and stuff, forging them out and seeing. And it was aggravating and stressful.
Yeah.
But when I got done, I thought, well, I'm really tired, and my hand really hurts, but I think I can get used to this. And I wouldn't want to frame a house left-handed or anything like that, but something where I can throw it. If it wasn't for getting to throw it back in the fire and take a break for a minute or two, I would have probably quit. But being able to take that few seconds and kind of rethink what I'm doing, and if I did it right-handed this way, what changes? I had to change the way I stand at the anvil. I had to change because used to I would stand with my left foot forward when I'm forging, just out of habit. Now I stand right foot forward.
Right.
And like I said, I turned the anvil 180 degrees to where I'm still standing there. I need to put my forge on the other side, but I really don't want to move it. I really don't want to move my anvil more than anything over that far because it's heavy. And, it's hard to do that with one hand.
Yeah.
And kind of repositioning everything was part of the challenge to deciding that I'm still going to keep doing it. Before this, my shop was I had everything right where I wanted it, and it was in order, like running my lathe. I've got it set up so I run my lathe with my right hand. Well, now I have to stand on the wrong side of my lathe and run it left-handed because I can't turn that wheel to move the axes.
Right.
And it's still aggravating, but I would be a lot madder if I'd sold my stuff.
Sure, for sure, absolutely.
It's kind of when I milled the guard for this, I had to do it twice. I threw the first one away because running it left-handed, I'm thinking, okay, I've got this, and I run in one direction and I pull back when I should have pushed forward, and I went, well, that didn't work out. Threw that one away and started another.
Yeah.
Normally that wouldn't be an issue, or before this it wouldn't have been an issue, but it's been one of the more challenging things, but it's still fun.
It's a whole new process, and that's what is so surprising to me. I'm not a knife maker. I don't know that I could even begin to build a knife, but I can't tell the difference between when you made before the accident and after. Which is super impressive.
That's what I was going to say.
I've tried to use my left hand for things before, and it's useless.
Yeah.
I can barely pick up this and take a drink with my left hand, let alone swing a hammer.
And people find it funny because they're like, are you right or left-handed? And I'm like, well, it depends. What am I doing? I open doors left-handed. I can't turn it. I can open a like that handicap accessible door left-handed because I just have to push. But like if I'm turning a knob, I'm doing it left-handed. I still write right-handed. I can write left-handed. My handwriting's horrible as it gets to start. So throw it in the left hand, it's even worse.
Yeah.
But everything else, it's pretty well dominantly left-handed now. Learning to brush my teeth left-handed was really weird.
Yeah.
Well, just thinking about like how awkward, you got toothpaste in your eyebrow.
It's like,
how does Okay, how does that happen?
I can see that.
Try brushing your teeth left.
Okay, you know what? Fair.
Yeah.
It's just everything was weird, getting used to doing stuff, and once I kind of figured out the everyday routine things of having a right arm that wasn't useful during the surgeries and all, I thought, well, I took the fishing trip and thought I could do that. And then, I use a lighter hammer now than I did, which makes more work. My favorite hammer is still sitting over there. Doesn't get much use.
Right.
I went from a 3.5 pound to a 2.5 pound. And I think eventually, if I keep forging, especially throughout the winter and stuff, it's when I do most of my forging, or try to, when it's not 120 degrees out. I think that I'll be able to start using that favorite hammer again. And, right now it's got a coat of oil on it and it just hangs out. But, hopefully when I finish getting all my equipment and stuff set back up in the shop, it'll be closer to like it never happened. I'll just be the left-handed guy doing it now,
Man,
I can't even imagine that. Like, thinking just how awkward and like wonky my left hand is, like even drawing or writing my name, like I couldn't even imagine switching from a very dominant hand to something that just seems like an accessory to me.
Yeah. Especially something so physical, something that you really your arms got to be putting out.
Yeah.
You can't softly forge metal.
To go like if I'm using a file for whatever reason, like cleaning up shoulders on a knife or whatever, used to I would do everything with this hand, all the detail work, and getting that fine motor down in the left hand to where you can do that, drawing it just right to where you're not scratching where you don't want to, or removing metal to a side you don't want to, and using my right hand as a brace a lot of the time, like on the end of the file or whatever, to put a little bit of pressure like I would if it was my left hand. It's really takes a lot longer. It slows things down. This guard on this knife I put on here left-handed, and I milled it left-handed. I cut the slot in here left-handed, filed it all out left-handed, and I made 2 of these. And normally same with this one. Normally I don't do that. Luckily, this one was trash. This one was salvageable. If I build a thicker knife, I can use it. But the one that's on here, that filing this out and keeping it square because I didn't mill it perfect, was really taxing. Because when I do a guard, I don't use a guide or anything like that. I work it, test fit it, work it, test fit it. And to keep that squared off and doing it with the wrong hand, holding a oddly shaped file with the wrong hand was a very slow going process. I could probably do it a little faster now, but I still don't trust that hand as much. But it's gonna get there, I think.
I mean, I'm telling you, I can't tell the difference between one before and one after. I'm sure you probably can, because you know.
I see a few little things that I would like to have done different, but knowing that I'm back in that learning curve again,
right,
I'm okay with it.
Right. Not only that, but like I've noticed, you want to do everything to like your standards, right? And no matter how long it takes, even after you have to use your left hand, you're gonna keep going back until it looks like you made it with your right hand.
Right. Right. A lot of my hand sanding takes me a lot longer now, because used to I would predominantly put my pressure and apply and do everything with that right side, to where now pushing and pulling with this right arm doesn't work. I can do it very little, and then I start having a lot of pain and unable to do as much. So now when I hand sand a blade, which this one's not, but one of these or this one even, I take and I have sanded blocks that I've machined, just flat aluminum with gasket material or just the hard aluminum side, to where when I draw it, I have my paper laid across it, pulled tight. I'll do it with just this hand, and I'll just sit there and work it, where used to I'd have 2 hands.
Right.
And I can't do 2 hands as often. Now when I get down in the really fine grit and I'm trying to get that perfect finish right before I'm done, I can use this hand as a backup, to assist, but it doesn't have the same effect it used to. It's less than a left hand now.
So is there any way at all that you will ever be able to get the strength in that right hand? Have any of the doctors given you any indication that maybe you could build it back up to what it was?
Being that they've removed muscle and the amount of nerve damage that there is, they don't think it will.
Yeah.
Like my last day of physical therapy, which has been quite a while back, they measured the strength in this hand, and it was 135 pounds of grip strength, and this one was 30.
Wow.
So it's one of those. I do, like, I've got some of the clamps to sit there and squeeze and do that, but I'm missing parts of muscle, and where they reconnected muscle isn't where it used to be.
Yeah, you can see
the. Is that a tendon or?
That's muscle.
Oh, it's muscle. Okay.
But you can see like below it where there's not that muscle anymore, and your elbow sticks out more than your other. It's pretty wild. You can see that piece even on the top of your arm there, where they took that chunk out. Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It made a big difference. It kind of kicked me back to like the first year of knife making again. I mean, it's like I watched all the videos and I know how to do it, and now I'm reteaching myself all the processes that used to be somewhat second nature to building a knife to starting over and going, you know, I think I know how to do that, so now I have to figure out physically how to do it.
See, just being in that mindset to where you were like, all right, I think I can make this work, and then just being able to go in there and try it, you know, that's crazy. Because I'm thinking about, like, if that would have been me, like with tattooing, there's no way I think I'd start tattooing left-handed, even practicing. Nothing.
I think that being pushed to do it, you know, helped.
Yeah.
You know? she said, you know, you've got all this money in it. You've got all this time, all these years you've invested in it. You know, spent time away from family and from home learning, and not to mention, golly, all the hours just being in the shop doing it before. It's kind of one of those, I couldn't just toss it to the side. I had to figure out a way to make it work. And that first week being in the shop was really tough.
Yeah.
I mean, because I literally I couldn't go work, back to work. I couldn't do a lot of the normal stuff. I still wasn't even to the point of really getting out and driving a lot. You know, because I was a right-hand driver and now I'm a left-hand driver.
Right.
And you know, it was just the repetitiveness of any of that was weird to me. And like I said, I went fishing on, like, it was like a Monday, and it was just me down there by myself. Figured that part out, and Tuesday morning I got up and I thought, well, it's time to go. I mean, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go grab some junk steel and go out here and give it a try. And, you know, I watched a lot of pieces of metal hit the floor. I mean,
Yeah.
And I still do. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll be forging on a blade, and next thing I know, it's on the ground, and I'm like, oh, got to grab that. You know, used to, my shop would get some leaves and stuff in it, and I wouldn't mind too much. I mean, yeah, I don't want to burn the shop down, but I also don't want to push a broom. Now I have to push a broom left-handed and get those out, because I'll drop something on a leaf and catch my shop, you know, and you know, the leaf blower has become my best friend when it comes to going out and forging to get stuff out of the way. And you know, this piece of metal probably hit my concrete at least 24 times before it ever looked anything like a knife, you know. But it's getting there.
Now, like, in that aspect of, like, kind of having to relearn how to do it, like, all with your left hand, is there any, like, I know it's very frustrating, I'm sure. Is there any sort of, like, nostalgia in it from, like, first starting off? Or is it all just kind of like, this sucks, but, you know, I love to do it?
No, I do find a few things, like when I go in and pinch this area here. When I first started doing it, it was really second nature to lay something. I clamp it in a vise, and I take a piece of round bar and forge onto that round bar to get a radius here and then in here, and then I take my cross peen section of my hammer and work it to get this to swell out like I want it for that look and that shape. And when I first started doing that right-handed, it was really, really hard to get used to not trying to forge everything flat and symmetrical, and kind of trying to keep it even but still have that unrefined look to it. So going in and making a knife like this left-handed now, it feels like the first time I ever did one. So it's that part of it is kind of interesting, and being unsure when I first started forging these, where to hold that bar to get that indentation where I wanted it and all that. It's kind of the same feeling. So it's not all been bad. It's not all been aggravating. It would still be nice not to be doing it this way.
Right.
But it's been eye-opening to kind of looking back at what I thought was hard then to what's hard now.
Right.
You know, it makes learning it right-handed seem so much easier.
That's just how you know you're very passionate about it.
I don't think I could go without doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard. I was back in the shop trying to learn to make knives again before I was out getting on my motorcycle. So I mean, and I haven't gone without riding one since I was 5. So
Yeah.
I went a year without getting on my bike and still have trouble doing it. Don't go far, but we're making modifications to where that's not as much of an issue now. But the knife shop modifications are taking longer.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I could do without it.
Yeah.
I don't know what else I would do. There's not a lot. I mean, I love drawing knives. I sit and draw a lot of them that I never build.
Mm-hmm.
Just to kind of see what's going on. Drawing left-handed is not very easy. I write right-handed,
Fuck
but
no.
Man.
but I still draw a lot of my stuff. I'll rough sketch stuff left-handed just to kind of get the idea. And my right hand drawing and typing and any of that wears out real easy. So I'll get my rough idea left-handed and then come back and kind of refine it with my right as best I can. And then
That's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
and then a lot of the time it'll hit a computer and I'll kind of scan it and clean it up and get an idea and then print it and make a bunch of copies. And that way, if I am going to build it, I can take it out there to the anvil and burn a few of them, laying hot steel on it to get the shape. And, I mean, I've got stacks of different patterns that I build, like this knife. And this one, since it had a flaw in it and I couldn't use it, I'll use this metal one a lot of the time. It'll sit out there on my anvil, and if I'm forging another one of these, I know I can, touch it to it and not catch it on fire.
Right.
But a lot of my little forge tail hunters and stuff like that, I burn a lot of copies of them, from it off of the original drawing I did of it, that I still use. And, luckily technology helps with some of that, but I haven't found pneumatic tongs yet. So the zip ties, and I've made some little metal pieces to where I get my tong in position and I can slide it over, and it'll help hold. It just takes me a second longer than normally just grabbing it out of the fire and going to it,
Right.
But it's still been rewarding. It just, instead of building 3 knives a week, I might build 1 knife every 3 weeks,
Yeah.
Has it
It's-
felt more rewarding in a way, or just kind of like the same?
No, it has at times. Finishing one that I'm just really drawn to or that I really like, it's kind of like the first knife I built again that I was really proud of. There's a knife I've got similar to this one that the first time I built it in the first one, when I got done with it, I was just like, yeah, that's the knife. That's the knife that I'm going to enjoy building forever. And I've built a bunch of them. And every one of them I build, I have the same feeling as that first one is, yep, that's it.
That's awesome.
And it has to be if there's something about it I don't like, I'll knock the handle off of it and do the handle over or whatever. But every time I finish one and it is what I want, it's just like the first one. I mean, it's always exciting to finish one that comes out like that.
Yeah. That's
awesome.
what it's all about right there.
For sure.
So, last thing, what about, what is this guy?
Ooh.
That's that one. That's the same knife.
Yeah.
Right.
With the,
Different materials.
is that carbon fiber?
Carbon fiber, and then micarta for the guard. And then it's just blackened out.
Really light too, that handle.
Mhm.
A little bit more meat on this guy to, I guess,
Mhm.
give him the weight.
Yeah.
So that, because you would have none back here, right?
Yeah, it's a very, very clean, fast version of this knife. I mean, the micarta guard is really a lot easier to work than any metal.
Yeah.
It's still strong. The carbon fiber is ultra light. It makes you itch, but
Sure.
it's mill it out and go to town, and I can, I threw that one together pretty quick. But I built that knife for me. you know, because I built so many of these. The first one of these I built, I was wearing, and I was in a local gun shop, and a guy came up and they were talking about knife makers, and they mentioned that I made one, and I said, yeah. Well, he wanted to see that knife, so I showed it to him, and he followed me out to the truck, and he wore the knife home, and I got cash. So, you know, and I've sold a few that way, and that's when I really thought I'm gonna keep doing this forever. You know, it's neat to build something that when I'm dead and gone, that somebody's still gonna be using
for sure, and
Definitely.
probably pass down to their kids and their kids' kids.
Not only that, but something someone can enjoy so much. I mean, this is
a lot of function out of.
Yeah, you're building tools for people, you know. Like and like I was talking earlier with mine, you know, I'm not out hunting with it or doing anything crazy, but you know, when I got a box I need to open, there's my knife. When, you know, I'm cooking and need to cut up a piece of meat, there's my knife.
Yeah. It's one of those, it's versatile. If you wanted to go camping, you could take it. You know, if you were fishing, you know, hunting, doing whatever, it's and when you have kids and you decide, hey, you know, this is yours now, and then they hand it down to their kid, you know. I have people that want to build their, you know, they want a knife for their kid's first knife. I want you to build my son his first knife. This is the first shed he ever found out at the deer woods, you know, and they give it to me, and I make a knife using sentimental stuff to them. It's pretty cool.
It's awesome, dude.
I mean, and to know that this kid is gonna probably carry that knife his whole life, you know, at least in deer season, is kind of cool, because he's gonna outlive me, so that knife's still gonna be here with my mark on it, you know, and I like it, you know.
So what do you recommend for like maintaining your knife so that it doesn't get all rusty?
Anything that I build is high carbon steel. What I like to do on mine is I wipe them down soap and water when I'm done using them. Like if I'm cutting anything that needs cleaned off. If I cut anything like box tape or something like that, alcohol or acetone works great to get any of that off quickly without having to scrub on it. I wipe them down, and then I use just a soft cloth. A lot of the time I use those blue Scots towels, because I have dozens of them, and I'll spray it with 3-in-1 oil, and that's my favorite oil that I use. Or if like your Damascus, you can use any gun oil, will work fine. Now if you have a Damascus that's etched in the really dark black and left that way, if you use a cleaning oil like a gun oil or something like that, like anything besides really rim oil, it'll take some of that black off, because it's carbon, and it'll take the carbon off. This knife is done in a grayer. It's supposed to be, when it's old, it's black, but it's kind of dry now. It eventually soaks up the oil and turns grayer. That 3-in-1 oil has been really good. Any decent quality gun oil works well. You know, in a pinch, you could use any food-based oil. Like my chef's knives, I know people wipe them down with vegetable oil. I don't like certain oils. I prefer almond oil because it doesn't sour over time. Vegetable oil and stuff can. Now, if you leave a light enough coat on it, it doesn't. But if there's any drops of it, it can sour over time. But, you know, wash it, dry it well. You know, never leave one sitting by the sink kind of thing.
Right.
Especially like on a drip towel or something like that, because it's carbon. It'll rust quick. And being high carbon, it's luckily most of the steel I use in the finish I finish them in, they don't rust deep before you notice it. Most of it can be cleaned off pretty easy with like a 4-aught steel wool or something like that. But a good oil, there's a couple companies that make like a wax paste that you can put on them. Car wax will work. Anything carnauba wise.
Really?
Just straight carnauba wax. You can put it on there if you're going to go for like a week or something out in the woods, or if you're going to store it for a while, or have it sitting up on where it's going to get just sitting out in the humidity. You know, any wax, car wax wise, you can apply it, lightly buff it off with a good soft towel. You know, you can go with oil right back over it if you want to. You know, and it's not going to hurt you to eat off of it, whatever, you know, cut stuff with it. I don't really have any particular oil that I favor. I mean, I use the 3-in-1 oil that, you know, that's just because that's what I have all the time, and it's cheap and it works good. But anything, anybody, if you trust it on your firearm, it'll probably work good on one of my knives, you know.
Yeah, that makes
and
sense.
you can oil the wood; it's not going to hurt it. You know, if you want to get around the guard or leave a little extra around where a guard is. My guards are sealed, but some people still feel more comfortable that way. You know, I've taken them, just worked it in there with my finger and thrown it on the bench without ever, you know, cleaning it up. Dust might stick to it, but, you know, if it's being stored for a while or in my display case there at the house, whatever, it might have a lot of oil on it. It might just have a little bit, you know, but I'll take them all every couple months, wipe a little oil on them and stick them right back. It's pretty simple maintenance.
Yeah. What about for sharpening? I'm sure you use your belt, right?
I do. I use my grinder a lot. If I'm just touching up an edge like on yours, I take a piece of thicker leather like a belt. I mean, the belt you wear works fine, and I'll cut a strip of 3M sandpaper, usually 600 grit and up to 1200, and I will lay it across that belt and put either a few drops of water or a little bit of oil, and I will basically, like I'm stroking that knife across that paper back and forth and refine that edge a little bit, and then I will toss the paper and just use the belt and go on and stroke it and get that edge cleaned up, and then a little bit of oil, and I'll test cut paper. And when I do that, what I'm feeling for, I'm not seeing, oh, does it, you know, slice? Yeah, that's great. But I'm trying to feel when I'm making that pass through that paper is, does it feel like it's catching?
Yeah.
Like, is it snagging? Is it tearing the paper? You know, and if I'm cutting along this edge here and everything is going smoothly, and then it feels a little bit grittier up here at the top, then I'll stroke that on out or take it and make another pass or two. And that's because I put that more of a convex or kind of a rolled edge on the edges of a lot of what I build, and I do that because it is durable. It holds up. That's why that one guy was able to clean a hog and 4 deer, you know,
Right.
is because it's got an edge on it it's a stable edge. It doesn't deflect, which, you know, your store-bought knives, the knife I'm carrying is a sharp ground edge. It doesn't have that convex to it. Now, once I sharpen it a few times, it will.
Yeah.
But right now, it's still the factory edge, and it holds up fine. It's just for harder use. I like that rolled edge.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to be safe with your knives. I'll be the first to tell you, man. I was in Boy Scouts, I don't know, 9, 10 years old. Got my first pocket knife. Thought it was awesome, right? Took it home, started playing with it, you know, cutting stuff up. I'm like, ooh, this is cool. First time I ever had it out, man. Started messing around with it. I went to close it, and boom, immediately just closed it right on my finger.
Yeah.
I've
Just
got a
deep
pretty-
red.
I got a
It
gnarly
was-
scar on my
ugh.
finger from that. I was using
Yeah.
mine as a screwdriver, and then shook, and right there, big
Yeah.
old gnarly scar.
The best advice is it's made for cutting.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a pry tool.
Yeah.
It's not a screwdriver.
Yeah.
Or a
Yeah.
toy.
Yeah, and definitely not a toy.
Yeah.
I watch these people with butterfly knives and stuff doing all these
Dude.
cool
Oh,
tricks,
man.
and I'm
It's
going,
crazy.
Ugh.
I would be the 6-fingered guy after about 5
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah.
For
You know.
sure. Me too.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I learned my lesson the hard way.
Mm-hmm. Me
Yeah.
too.
See?
Probably should have got stitches, but you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you know.
That's why I like fixed blade now.
Yeah. I still mess around with some of the. I've got like a little switchblade kind of deal, and I think it's cool. But you know, fixed blade's cool too.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
problem with it.
Definitely a tough knife. Kind of hard to beat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Classic.
Yeah.
Classic.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up on about 2 hours now, y'all, and
Nice.
usually where we end the podcast, great thing to end it on, knife safety. This
So
needs to go away.
if someone is interested in getting themselves a rad left-handed Griffin-made knife, how do they get a hold of you?
The easiest way is through Facebook. I have an Instagram as well. I use the Facebook. I have a page, Griffin Handmade Knives.
Got it pulled up right here for you.
I use it more than anything, or my personal page, which is just David Griffin. There's a lot of us out there. You have to find the guy that either has a knife or a Toyota FJ as his picture is me, depending on the week.
So, yeah.
And I get a lot of messages on there of people wanting to order stuff, and that anymore with the amount of telemarketers I get on my cell phone, I don't answer a lot of unknown numbers.
Right.
So
Right.
Messenger's always good because it may take me a few days, but I do check them regularly. So.
Okay.
Where did you come up with your mark here? By the way, did you design that?
Yeah, it's kind of a rip off of a family crest.
Yeah.
And I really wanted a Griffin somewhere in it.
Right.
And
it only makes sense.
Yeah, and I didn't really want to just stick my name on everything,
Right.
A mark is cooler.
Yeah,
For sure.
I think that it's kind of classic. I mean, if I ever got my Journey Smith or Master Smith or did any of that, I would have to put my name somewhere on it, but I'd still have to put that and then my name somewhere below, like somewhere on the Ricasso or something, possibly. I know a few Master Smiths that literally just have a mark and then their MS on the other side. And, I wanted something that was pretty simple and clean, but still had kind of an old world look to it. Because a lot of what I build, it has an older look. I don't date or age any of my knives. Now, if someone wants to know when I made it, I can go back and I keep track of all of them. I can tell them the date I started it and the date I finished it. But I think that mark, I do it in different sizes, depending on the material I'm using. But it's been a good one.
Yeah, I like it.
No, before I throw it up on the video, is this your Instagram that you'd be cool with putting out there?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
cool. So yeah, if you don't have Facebook or anything, if you do want to find him on Instagram, it'd be David Griffin 1981, and you can see a lot of cool knives.
Is that
there.
that first one there, the one you were talking about earlier? That you
Yeah, that's some stag that I got from another knife maker. The guy that actually does a lot of my leather for me, Larry Inman. He had that antler for a long time in his shop. Scaled. It was some scales that he bought, and we did some horse trading for some other antler, and that just fit that knife too well.
Nice.
That's one of my pretty common forge tail hunters that I make a lot of. It's a really good knife.
So yeah, if you want to find him on Instagram here, or if you want to find him on Facebook, if that's your deal, Griffin Handmade Knives. Don't forget to visit thesameolddevils.com. We've got some new clothing, and we still got the classic pins here, so buy it, please.
Yeah, check it out.
Because it's quality. That material is soft.
Well, thanks for coming, dude.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing your
Enjoyed you,
knives,
I appreciate
teaching us some stuff. I didn't know even probably half of what it takes to build a knife.
It's a little bit of work, but it's worth it.
That's a lot of work.
Man.
Yeah.
But it's definitely rad. And I definitely got to get another one since I bonehead left mine. Somebody's got that knife now. I called that hotel like 6 times that day. Like, hey, did you find my knife? Hey, my knife is there. You got it? Hey, who's got my knife?
I've had a few people misplace or had a guy's truck get broken into, and they took the knife off the visor, and he was headed to Sturgis, and he said, "Man, I'll pay whatever you want. I need this knife." I said, "Well, I can do it." And he said, "Well, I need it day after tomorrow." And I said, "I can do it, but
it's gonna cost you."
I said, "There's, he said, we can make it work."
Damn.
He got another knife identical to the one he had before, just as happy with it, but he missed the one he carried for 2 years,
Yeah.
So.
I've been missing mine. I think actually it's been a little while. It was when I went to pick up my car. Actually, we went down to Dallas, and I've missed it ever since.
Well, we'll get that taken care of.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, for watching and listening. It was a real fun show today. Thank you for coming, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Glad
definitely.
to be here.
Definitely.
Glad to be here.
And we love you all. And bye-bye.
See you next time.
All right.